There's a version of the truth that never makes it to trial. It gets buried in a case file. It gets explained away by someone with a badge and a reason to look somewhere else. It gets swallowed by a small town that decides, quietly, that certain things are better left alone. Tonight, we're digging it back up. One case, one victim, and a trail of decisions that should have led somewhere, but didn't. Not for a very long time. And for some people involved, not ever. So settle in. This one goes deep. The case, Dee Dee Jondle. Everyone in town knew. She had been missing for 11 years before anyone was charged. 11 years, during which her ex-husband remarried, during which he attended community events and coached Little League and shook hands at the county fair. During which the people who knew what happened, and there were people who knew, stayed quiet. It wasn't a cold case. It was a covered one. Part 1. Plattsmouth. Plattsmouth, Nebraska sits at the confluence of the Platte and Missouri rivers, about 20 miles south of Omaha. Population roughly 8,000. The kind of town where the same families have lived for 4 generations, where everybody went to the same high school, dated the same people, knew the same secrets. It's the kind of place where reputation is currency, and where a man with the right handshake and the right last name can spend that currency for a very long time. Dee Dee Jondle, born Deanna Frady, grew up in Plattsmouth and never really left. She was outgoing and warm, a woman who filled a room. She had 2 kids from an earlier relationship, and in the late 1980s she married a local man named Jerry Jondle. Jerry was well connected. His family had roots in the area. He was charming in the way that a certain kind of man in a certain kind of small town can be charming. Useful charm, the kind that gets things done and gets things overlooked. The marriage was not a happy one. People who knew Dee Dee during those years say she was afraid of Jerry, that she had confided in friends about his temper, that she had talked about leaving. She disappeared on October 15, 1992. Dee Dee was 36 years old. She and Jerry had separated by this point, and she was living on her own. On the night she vanished, her car was found parked at a boat ramp along the Missouri River. The doors were unlocked. Her purse was inside. And her shoes, the ones she'd been wearing that day, were found on the riverbank. Cass County Sheriff's investigators initially treated it as a probable drowning. The Missouri River in October is cold and fast and unforgiving, and the area around the boat ramp was known to be dangerous at night. Divers searched the river. They found nothing. Jerry Jondle told investigators his ex-wife had been depressed, that she'd been struggling. He expressed grief in the way that a grieving ex-husband is supposed to, and investigators nodded, and the file was opened under suspicious circumstances. Not homicide, not yet. And the town of Plattsmouth went about its business. Part 2. What People Said. Here's the thing about small towns and secrets. The secret rarely stays completely secret. It gets worn down at the edges. It leaks through in conversations people shouldn't be having, in remarks made at bars, in things said to the wrong person at the wrong moment. The town doesn't know, not officially, not provably, but the town has a feeling, and in Plattsmouth, the feeling about what happened to Dee Dee Jondle was not subtle. Within months of her disappearance, people who knew Jerry were talking, not to police, not yet, but to each other. There were stories about his temper that predated Dee Dee's disappearance. There was a specific account shared among a small group of people who had known the couple during their marriage that Jerry had threatened Dee Dee more than once, that she had been afraid not just in the abstract way of someone in a difficult relationship, but specifically, concretely afraid. My one friend of Dee Dee's told people she'd had a conversation with Dee Dee just days before she vanished. Dee Dee had told her she thought Jerry was going to hurt her. She'd used those words, or words close enough to those words that the meaning was unmistakable. That friend did not go to the police immediately. She was afraid. She had her own family. She lived in the same town as Jerry Jondle and his connections. She waited. In the meantime, Dee Dee's body never surfaced. The Missouri River, despite extensive searching, gave nothing back. Without a body, without physical evidence connecting anyone to a crime, the case drifted. It was reviewed periodically by the Cass County Sheriff's Office. Each review found insufficient evidence to move forward. Each review closed with the file going back into the cabinet. Jerry Jondle remarried in 1995, 3 years after Dee Dee vanished. He continued to live in the area. He continued to be part of the community. 11 years passed. Part 3. The Break. In 2003, a woman contacted the Cass County Sheriff's Office. She said she had information about Dee Dee Jondle's disappearance. She said she had been sitting on it for years because she was afraid of what would happen if she came forward. She said she couldn't sit on it anymore. What she told investigators changed the entire shape of the case. According to this witness, and investigators would eventually corroborate key elements of her account through additional interviews. Jerry Jondle had not been alone on the night Dee Dee disappeared. He had been with at least one other person, and the account of what happened at that boat ramp was not a drowning. It was not a suicide. It was not an accident. Dee Dee Jondle had been killed. Her body had been placed in the river, and at least one other person in Plattsmouth had known about it for over a decade. Investigators reopened the case. The Nebraska State Patrol was brought in. The Cass County Attorney's Office began building toward charges. It was a slow, careful process. They had no body. They had witnesses who had stayed silent for a decade and whose credibility would be challenged. And they had a suspect who had spent 11 years establishing himself as a grieving ex-husband rather than a murderer. In 2003, Jerry Jondle was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Dee Dee Jondle. The trial began in 2004. When the prosecution's case rested heavily on witness testimony, people who had known Jerry and Dee Dee, people who had heard things over the years, people who were coming forward now, 11 years later, with what they had been too afraid to say before. The defense attacked the timeline. The defense attacked the witnesses. The defense pointed out repeatedly and loudly that there was no body, no physical evidence directly linking Jerry to a crime, and that the entire prosecution hinged on the accounts of people who had waited over a decade to speak up. The defense wasn't wrong about any of those facts, but the jury believed the witnesses. Jerry Jondle was convicted of first-degree murder in 2004 and sentenced to life in prison. Part 4. The River. Dee Dee's body was never recovered. The Missouri River is long and powerful, and it has kept its share of secrets. Despite searches at the time of her disappearance and additional searches following Jerry's conviction, she was never found. Her family has never had a grave to stand at. They've never had a burial. They had a trial, and they had a conviction, and they had a verdict that said yes, she was murdered. But they never had her back. There is a particular cruelty to that, to know legally and officially and beyond a reasonable doubt, what happened to someone you love and still not be able to bring them home? Dee Dee's children were young when she vanished. They grew up without her. They grew up in a town where the man who killed their mother was, for 11 years, still walking around, still shaking hands, still coaching Little League. And think about that for a moment. 11 years of watching the person responsible for your mother's death exist in the world like it was nothing. After the conviction, some of the people who had stayed quiet for those 11 years spoke publicly about why they had waited. Fear came up most often. Jerry had a reputation. His family had connections. Platt's mouth was small enough that the wrong conversation got back to the wrong person fast. Some of them had children. Some of them had jobs that depended on relationships in the community. Some of them had simply made the calculation, consciously or not, that the risk of speaking outweighed whatever they thought speaking might accomplish. They weren't villains. Most of them were just scared. But those 11 years cost something. They cost Dee Dee's kids their mother for over a decade without resolution. They cost Dee Dee's friends and family the chance at justice while the wound was still fresh. They cost the truth the thing it needed most, which was air. Part 5. What Stays? Jerry Jondle appealed his conviction. The appeals raised questions about jury instructions and evidentiary rulings. The Nebraska courts reviewed the case. The conviction was upheld. He has remained incarcerated. His earliest possible parole consideration is still years away, if it comes at all. The woman who finally came forward in 2003, the one whose account cracked the case open, has spoken about what it cost her to stay silent for as long as she did. She has said she thinks about Dee Dee regularly. She has said she wishes she had found the courage to speak sooner. She has said she doesn't fully know why she finally did. That it was a combination of things, of guilt building up over years until it became heavier than the fear. That's how a lot of these cases break. Not with a dramatic revelation or a new piece of forensic evidence. Just the slow, grinding weight of a secret that eventually becomes too much for someone to keep carrying. What happened to Dee Dee Jondle is not a mystery. We know what happened. We have a conviction and a sentence and a case record that lays it out. What lingers, what makes this case worth sitting with, is everything that surrounds the crime itself. The years of silence, the community that knew something and found ways to not know it fully. The system that reviewed the file periodically and found nothing to move on, not because there was nothing there, but because turning a feeling into a charge requires someone to say something out loud, and nobody was ready to say it yet. Dee Dee Jondle was 36 years old. She had children who needed her. She had friends who loved her. She had confided in at least one person that she was afraid, and that person carried that confidence for 11 years before the weight of it broke. She deserved better than 11 years. She deserved to have someone say something the first time. Small towns are good at a lot of things: community, memory, loyalty. The kind of closeness that means someone always brings a casserole when someone else is sick. That the same families sit in the same pews for generations. Or that everyone knows everyone's name. But that same closeness, that same loyalty, can become something else when it's pointed in the wrong direction. When it protects the wrong person. When the thing everyone knows but no one says out loud is that a woman is dead, and the man who killed her is standing right there at the county fair, waving like everything is fine. Dee Dee Jondle's case ended with a conviction. That's more than some families ever get. But 11 years is a long time to wait for the truth to get loud enough to matter. If you have information about a cold case, if you're carrying something you've been holding on to because the fear felt bigger than the cost, remember that fear has a shelf life. It doesn't get lighter, it just gets more expensive. We'll be back next time. Until then, the cases that don't make headlines still have names. Remember them.